Hey guys, here we are, back once again for another exciting reading. I feel pretty tip-top today, but my voice is a little hazy, so we'll see how it goes tonight. And I do have a little cup of O, so nice to see you all here. Well, who have we got? We got Brian, you're here, nice to see you. And Rocky Stucci is in the room, so shut up. Hashtag ground control for the big friggin' cannoli. Thank you very much. And Chris Jones, I think he's still here. Good to see you, Chris. I think you're a he. So if you're not a he, correct me. And I may know you and I may not know you. I'm not sure. All right. So tonight, the reading is going to be here. Let me readjust my screen just a touch here. It's all different from when I laid it out on a different cam. So I got a pseudo background up now, starting to get my office put back together. Haven't painted the walls or anything yet, but starting to get some of my junk up. So there we go. Chris, we've never met. I didn't know if we were friends on Facebook or not. So found me with Jeff. That's a good place to have found me. Jeff and I have known each other for quite a while, and we started doing radio shows together quite a while ago too. There's no beginning date. It's like I don't know when. And we do Thursday nights. We do the Consequential Rapscallions, Jeff and I. So every now and then Rocky Stucci joins us, and so hopefully we'll be doing that again. And Rocky, I want you to put this on the back burner to start thinking about. As many of you may or may not know, when Rocky and I were doing radio, we had the Situation Room, which is now Rocky Stucci's Situation Room. But back when we were doing it with our friend and cohort, John Ward, who is a British archaeologist in Egypt. And John and Rocky and I had quite a show that was going for a long time. And Rocky, what I want you to put on the back burner, and I think we've talked about this before, would love to get John Ward together with you and I for one of the Situation Room shows. So, yeah, I enjoy your slapping John, too. That came up in today's my memories on Facebook today. That was pretty funny scene. Folks, if you haven't seen it, go check out Rocky's Facebook or mine. And you can see that. Now, what I'd like you to do, a little bit of business, is this channel. This is my Adventure Town Communique channel is what I've called it, but it's under my name. That's the way I set it up. So it's under Scotty Roberts or Mr. Scotty Roberts. I don't remember which. But what I want you to do when you're listening to this broadcast, just go down below here, hit the subscribe button. Also like the broadcasts if you would. That helps raise my rankings a little bit in YouTube. And I want to really start building up this channel so it garners listeners and garners interested people. And so go ahead and like tonight's broadcast. Go ahead and like the past broadcasts if you listen to them. And do subscribe and then hit the little bell that's right next to it. And you'll get notifications as to when this little show goes live. Now, we're reading The Rise and Fall of the Nephilim. This was my book published by New Page Books back in 2011. And I have changed, as I've said on a couple of these shows, I've changed some of my views. And tonight is going to be a glaring example of that. There are things we're going to talk about tonight that I have changed my views on or don't hold as similar a stance to those things as I used to. But we're going to finish reading this book. It's 10 chapters, then the conclusion. And so there's maybe 4 or 5 more broadcasts, and this book will be done. And then I want to move into doing my next book, which was the follow-up to this, The Secret History of the Reptilians. And it's subtitled The Pervasive Presence of the Serpent Throughout Human History, Religion, and Alien Mythos. And we're going to tackle this one next. Might put it on a more regular basis rather than every night of the week. We might spread it out a little bit because I'm going to do other things as well. So we'll worry about that when we get there. That's how I plan things. So It's like the old joke. How many ADHD guys does it take to screw in a light bulb? Let's ride bikes. So tonight we're gonna tackle a chapter on aliens and the alien factor, the alien influence, if there was any. And the reason I approach this nowadays with hesitancy is that when I say my views have changed a bit, I was a lot more immersed in the whole ancient alien culture back when I wrote this book. And I had this going like two parallel highways running along each other. The one that was the historical, the biblical, and all of these, and then there was the alienist highway. And I really did have a lot of questions, and maybe still do. Were we once visited in our ancient past by otherworldly intelligences? Now, I have said several times through the reading of this book, when I talk about extraterrestrial, I'm just speaking of that which is from without the earth, or not of the earth. And I'm many times I am personally meaning celestial beings. Now, the big question there as well is, do I believe that this all happened the way I'm reading this? Or am I looking at it as I'm presenting it to you as biblical or Judeo-Christian mythology, which I believe exists? If you went to church, if you went to synagogue, and I'm sticking with those two because that's really where I come from as Judeo-Christian, it does not necessarily mean that I am a strict adherent to everything that I learned. I have unindoctrinated myself in ways. I've disconnected from certain things about, hyper-fundamentalist conservative Christian faith, which is what I was. And but that doesn't mean that I can throw it all away, because sometimes we find that when we do that, we end up discarding one spirituality for another. We found a surrogate for it. And I think, let's see. Oh, I was just watching Joe Lee. How you doing? So I think that there's a problem when you disconnect or become agnostic, if you will, which is what I consider myself to be. I'm not atheist. I am agnostic because I just lack knowledge. I don't know the answers for as much as I studied them, but I studied them within a framework, within a context of faith, not from without. So there's a problem when you discard the one, yet are willing to accept spiritualities from something else of another kind. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to just fill the gaps or fill the void with a surrogate, something that is the better thing for me. It's like I mentioned even in the reading of this book, I think it was the very first one. I have a friend who is a skeptic and an atheist. And I told him, you are just an evangelist in the Church of Skeptic. And he bristled at that notion. And I said, the idea being that if you're going to take down or replace something that you say you no longer believe or you find no way to prove, so you're not going to believe it, in essence, you're taking your skepticism, your atheism, and elevating those things to the surrogate religion for you. That's become your surrogate faith. And so anyway, there you are. And Brian Parker, you're still questioning God versus Gadriel, because people shorten words and God is pronounced God. And God is pronounced God. I always heard that, what was the comedian that said, well, of course God is a man. God is a man's name. Or a boy's name, he said. God's a boy's name. So there you go. So that's the approach I'm going to take tonight now before I start reading this. And let me just go through and see if there's anything anybody wanted to say. Bigfoot's foot. Yeah, there it is back there. That is actually a casting that was given to me by Eric Altman. And that is a casting done of a casting from, I believe it's the Patterson-Gimli. If you remember the famous Patterson-Gimli film, it's from that site, if I'm not mistaken. I think he said it may have been from a different one, but that's what he said when he gave it to me. So I'm going to stick with that for now. And so that hangs my wall. You can see how big that thing is. It's a cast of a cast. There you go. That's the size of that foot. And really, it's a cast of my hand. Now, let's see. Just moving on a little bit. Hi, Jolie. I did say hi to you. And it's glad to have you here. And so it's hard to say a joke funny when you're in a room alone. Yeah, there's only a few people in the chat room tonight. But that's the way it always is, isn't it? Like Rocky's show, The Situation Room. When I'm in a chat room, we'll have 17 to 30 people in the chat room max, but there's thousands of people watching it. So you can check out these videos. Once again, my name isn't as widespread as it once was on YouTube, and I'm rebuilding this site a bit. And so we're averaging about 150 viewers of our videos within a day or two of them airing. So there it is. And so I'm doing my best. And we'll see how it goes. Quality, not quantity. Thus saith the mark. And I'm there with it. Okay, so without further ado, as they say, or further goodbyes, if that was French, let's hop into this. Last night was a marathon chapter on the Watchers. And I don't know if you all here were, I know Mark was here most of the time, if not the whole time. Some of you had to leave a little early, and there were people in and out. But I think we covered that pretty well, and now we're moving into the very next thought in the book, and that is alien influence. And it's actually, I've entitled the chapter Alien Influence with a question mark. Is there alien influence? Does anything with all this stuff we've been talking about, the Nephilim, the Watchers, the interaction with humankind, is this all just mythology? Is there something to it? And if there's something to it, could the mythology be replaced with alien influence? And so that's... oh, thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. He's sharing his playlist on all the sites. So let's roll here. I like to do, the little preamble to try to make sure we can get some enough people who wanted to come in to be here. So let's just roll with it. Alien Influence, Chapter 6. Devoutly to be wished, to die, to sleep perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come, when we have shuffled off this mortal coil, must give us pause. There's the respect that makes calamity of so long life. Shakespeare said that. That's Hamlet. Now, despite my many questions and ponderings, based on the things I've studied, read, and absorbed over the years, I still cling to my Judeo-Christian roots. And making the leap from God, angels, demons to UFOs, extraterrestrials, and aliens is an exponential one for me. How about that? I said the same thing 8 years ago. Yet there's so much information out there that would tend to substantiate the existence of UFOs and alien interruption in humanity. There's so much that it can't be overlooked. If you're anything at all like me, these things make you pause. They make you wonder and recalculate the things that you were taught. I've always said rather cheekily that when it comes to biblical theology, I've not thrown out the baby with the bathwater. Were I to make an on-the-spot statement of faith, I would say that I adhere to the basic tenets of the Bible and hold Jehovah God as the supreme being, as well as a faith in Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit. Now, I have to tell you, folks, much to some people's chagrin, my views have changed on that a little bit. Okay? In my youth, I was taught that the Bible is the only authority for faith and practice. As a matter of fact, that was one of the mission statements or mandates of the fundamental conservative Baptist church that I was part of. It was the Bible is our only foundation for faith and practice. So that's what we were taught, and that's how we were supposed to live. Especially as a good conservative Baptist. The further I grow in distance from my cloistered education and walled-in fishbowl denominational practices, and by fishbowl I mean that we, the believers, congregationally sat inside our glass bowl of the church while the rest of the world looked in and we looked out. I'm finding that there is so much more to the universe than what we were taught, so much more to God than is visible in a methodological Christian environment. Then there's that stinging, lurking fear in the back of my mind that any deviation from my old faith practices is merely my sinful nature drawing me away from God and his dictates. Now, it's funny. We were just watching last night with my little kids. We were watching, they're not babies, they're my little kids, 9, 7, and 4. And we watched the old It, Stephen King's It, the one from the early 1980s that was made for TV. And it was pretty lame. I think at the time it might have scared people, but it was pretty, compared to things that you see nowadays, it was nothing. So today, the kids are like, can we get the new version? Can we get this? So we got the new version. And we chose to watch it at noon while eating pizza, so the kids didn't watch it at night. And I thought, if it gets a little too heavy-handed, I'll turn this off. But it was good for a couple of scares for my kids. It was much better than the other. But the point I'm going to make with this is what I just said here. There is that stinging, lurking fear in the back of my mind. What was the thing that drove the creature in it? It was the fear factor. It fed off of you physically, but it also fed off of your fears. And that's what made it grow and made it do its thing. And once the kids conquered over their fear of the thing, it was less of a problem. And that's kind of what just popped into my head as I'm reading about fear. The Apostle Paul, and as many of you know, if you listen to Jeff's show, I believe now, I've grown to believe, the false Apostle Paul, who wrote 2/3 of the New Testament. So therefore, most of Christianity today is Pauline Christianity, as opposed to Jesus Christianity. Paul warned his acolyte, Timothy, that the time will come when men will not put up with sound doctrine. Instead, to suit their own desires, they will gather around them a great number of teachers to say what their itching ears want to hear. So a condemnation from within the Bible of hearing things that sound good to you and better to you, as opposed to just doing what you're told. And I find myself wondering if my disillusionment with the church organization and methodology was the catalyst I allowed to drag me from the true faith, quote unquote. I find that I struggle with what was ingrained in my head and heart versus what I research and discover. And I consider myself a thinker, but there are times when I may imbue my thinking with fear of becoming inviolate of religious mandate and practice. And therein lies the rub. No matter which way you look at this enigma, no matter how much existential mumbo-jumbo we wish to ascribe to our existence in the universe, or how much power or initiative or self-illumination we think we may possess, we are still the products of someone else's creation and the toys of some superior being's manipulation. We are not our own. Whether it was an almighty, omnipotent God who created us from the dust of the ground and breathed into our nostrils the breath of life, or some enslaving, experimenting race of interstellar breeders who interfered with our primordial DNA, we are the product, or at least the byproduct, of someone else's hand. Are we God's creations to do with as he pleases? Having been imbued with a free will that is only truly free will until, like insurance, you actually have to use it? Or are we the descendants of an alien science experiment, the genetic offspring of an extraterrestrial race that was either acting in benevolence by imposing its superior DNA into our race of genetically intellectual gutter monkeys, or implementing an intent that was far more sinister and enslaving? Hashtag gutter monkeys. That's who we are. Or are we simply the products of chemical reactions and evolutionary mutation and development? slaves to overt eradication of anything spiritual in order to default to what is scientific and explainable by mathematics and scientific methodology. Either way, it appears as if we, the human race, are simply someone else's toys. And sometimes it's just cooler to think that we're the offspring of alien interruption, as opposed to sinners in the hands of an angry God. I believe that is why the scientific skeptical community eschews the spiritual and the metaphysical. They simply want to seek the basic nuts and bolts without having to answer to a higher authority or deal with the implications of the soul and the spirit. As I said quite a bit earlier in this book, there are veils we simply have no ability to pierce. And both the scientific skeptical circles and the religious faith-based circles are dead set on operating on the basis of what simply cannot be seen or proved. One circle consciously disregards and eradicates it as a part of the functional equation, and the other incorporates it in every facet of life. Now, I want to ask you something. Hey, Audrey and Kay, nice to see you. And She Said It, Kitten, nice to see y'all. Let me ask you guys a question. I can't remember if I talked about this as an aside to something else I read in the book, or if this was just on one of the radio shows with Jeff or Rocky. But the last time I was in Egypt, it was a couple times ago, we were floating down the Nile on a big dahabeah with our group. John Ward and I had gone the year earlier and done our own expedition for a month for our book. And then the following year, we took 13 people along with us. And so we're floating down the Nile, and a guy that was their boss from the Ministry of Antiquities in Egypt, because of their archaeological site, he came along with us, an Egyptian man. Gregarious. I almost look at him as, remember Salah from Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark? And he would talk like this, "Oh, Indy, my friend, asps very deadly. You go first." He reminds me of him, only he wasn't quite as scruffy. And so this was the guy that was kind of their boss from Komombo, the inspectorate or the inspector general or something like that. And there was one day he overheard me talking to somebody, and later we were sitting on the deck of the dahabeah and floating down the Nile and having coffee. And he says, "Scotty, I must ask you, you said earlier that you have lost your faith." He says, "Please explain to me, how does one lose their faith?" And I said, "Oh, fantastic, Audrey. She brought a cannoli for dessert tonight. I hope you thought of me with every bite." So he says, "How do you lose your faith?" And so I explained to him some of what I just read, that I had challenges and problems and things that I didn't, and I just had walked away from it. And he says, "Okay, I understand that." And so as we're talking, I asked him, I said, "Let me ask you a question." I said, "You are a Muslim?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "But you are also a scientist. You're an archaeologist. You have your PhD in historical studies and archaeology." I said, "Let me ask you, as a Muslim who, in Islam, we know that life is a religion is life. Everything falls under the category of your religion." And I said, "So let me ask you, when you as a scientist come across something that controverts your faith, how do you deal with that? What do you do?" And his eyebrows kind of went up. I've asked Muslims questions like this before, and they all have this answer that's kind of like this. It's the facial expression. The eyes close, eyebrows goes up, and he kind of shrugs. And he says, "Well, Scotty," he says, "my faith is here. My science is here. And I do not let them meet." And that's what I thought of as I was reading this, is that why, if our faith is supposed to be something that's so real and so strong, Why do we encounter in science things that make us want to push faith away in order to be able to research and study the right way? And when we do that, do we create a void that leaves it open? It's like the song, if you can't be with the one you love, love the one you're with. Why did that just pop into my head? If you can't be the Christian or the Jew or the while you're studying, you push it out, then you love the one you're with. And that's the science, that's the history, that's the archaeology. So that's just something to think about, because I have found in my own life that I run into an inconsistency, a brick wall between the two. It's like two trains running toward each other that are going to collide on the same track. And it's not saying that one is true and the other is necessarily false. It might be all true, but trying to make them come together is the hard part. And many times I've had to just push it away and walk away. All right, so the next section in this chapter is called Boiling It All Down. Whatever your leaping off point, be it faith, spirit, science, skepticism, anthropology, whether religious, anti-religious, Christian, Jew, atheist, animist, pagan, Wiccan, true believer, etc., ad infinitum, it doesn't matter when it comes down to sifting through the evidences and the facts, such as they may be. What is clear is that there was some interruption in the human race. I'm going to state that again. This is something when George Norrie was interviewing me on this book back in 2011, sorry. One of the final statements I made, I said to him, he said, Scott, can encapsulate this all for us. And I said, it just seems to me that we are the product of race interrupted. And he kind of went, oh, yeah. He says, that's exactly what I think. And so this is it. What is clear is that there was some interruption in the human race. Somewhere along the way, race got interrupted. And by race, I mean the human race. Let me get on a pet peeve for just a second. I wrote an article a couple of years ago critiquing the movie Noah with Russell Crowe. And in there, I was talking about the biblical belief and the idea that, and we talked about this in the previous chapter, in the chapter before, how Noah was chosen because he was a man who was pure in all his generations. In other words, he could trace his generations all the way back to Adam. And so he was, when everyone else wasn't, he was pure human, genetically. Well, some well-known skeptic out there took me to task publicly, tried to, and said that I was a racist because I said Noah was pure human. And he says, nobody's pure human, and anybody who claims they are, that's white supremacy, blah, 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 blah. Ad infinitum, he went on. And I came into his chat room attached to his article and pretty much just told him, I said, you do realize we're talking about mythology here, biblical mythology and celestial beings. We're not talking about racism. I said, so I think you need to stow it. So anyway, so I'm a racist, by the way, because I believe Noah was one of the few humans not imbued with a mix of human and celestial blood. Boom. All right. So what is clear is that there was some interruption in the human race. Whether it can be hinged on the extinction of the dinosaurs, opening up the way for human development without being eaten, or microbial mutations that developed and evolved over eons, bringing the human race where it is today, with obviously much more evolving to do if we believe the chain of evolution is still moving along, or the hands of a divine creative force, whether you view that entity as a spiritual religious one or simply an entity that has the supreme power over us. Or perhaps it was clean and simple as extraterrestrial interruption of some sort. And then there are the proponents of the philosophies such as the following quote that ignore any other outside-the-box investigation by immediately dismissing its veracity for the simple reason that it's not revealed in the God's Word, the Holy Bible. The Bible, the revealed written Word of God, teaches that life is only possible through a process of creation. Even if there were other galaxies and planets very similar to Earth, life could only be there if the Creator had fashioned it. If God had done that, and if these things were going to visit us one day, then he would surely not have left us unenlightened about this possibility. So therefore, because the Bible didn't mention it, aliens aren't real. But as a side note, are we sure the Bible doesn't mention it? Got to listen to Jeff Dougherty. There's a whole hell of a lot he has to say about that. Now, pardon the crass vernacular, but these are the sorts of statements that have me crying bullshit. This brand of mindless, limited, inane, uneducated dross has me seeing red and serves no purpose to further an understanding other than that which lies within a particular mindset or theology or philosophy or scientific framework. As you can probably tell by now, I'm not one who has abandoned his faith, nor am I one who dismisses science and skepticism, but I measure the building blocks of these things against each other. The answers come only as the fabricated Berlin walls of division, then the finger-pointed caterwauls of ignorance, and frauds start having holes bored into them. The naked truth of this matter, so sorry to inform my theological friends, is that God has given us information about these aliens, and it is written in the very same pages of Scripture they use to bolster an argument against such things. Are you hanging on your chair? Whatever the truth of the matter, because believe it or not, truth is not governed by perception. There are evidences all over the world and in nearly every ancient culture, spirituality and history, that record extraordinary events. Those events have their tone set in cement, based on an interpretation given by the people who experienced them firsthand. Whether influenced by the divine or the angelic or the alien, the task in the present day is to determine just what it is that happened. And frankly, that may not be possible beyond mere hypothesis. So next section, the nitty-gritty. Oh, let's see. I see something here I might need to comment on. Generations is like the Constitution, referring to their posterity, in my opinion, yes. When it talks about Noah being pure in all his generations, they're going back all the way back to Seth and then Adam to show that his generations were pure human. And it was to do this to set the stage, as we mentioned in one of the earlier chapters, it was to set the stage for the Jewish kinsman redeemer, who had to be a redeemer, a savior, a Messiah that was one of us. So they needed to establish that Noah, who everybody funneled down to Noah because he was the last living guy at the flood, and then the first living guy with his kids after the flood, that his line was pure back to Adam. He was a pure human blood, is the point. The Bible doesn't mention dinosaurs either. No, it really doesn't. I have heard there was a guy named Morris. I can't think of his first name. It'll come to me. Who had the Creation Society or something like that. The Scientific Creation Society. Back in the 70s, even. Grant Morris, I think it was. And he was one that was trying to prove that, hey, dinosaurs did walk with humans. You see, this is something that's gotten fame, and I don't even know what it is off the top of my head, where it shows tracks of human tracks and dinosaur tracks crisscrossing each other in petrified mud. Does mud petrify? Turns to stone. So the Bible doesn't mention dinosaurs, except for that one picture of Jesus riding a triceratops. But let's see. Kay said, I believe part of use humans is from oceans. Okay, I get what you're saying. Part of us it comes from the ocean. Yeah. Those who preach racism need to define it. I agree. Dinosaurs at the time think as silly we are on a spinning ball. But what do I know? Yeah, it's a silly notion, I think. And let's see. Brian Parker, you retracted a message. Oh, well. I didn't see that one. What is race? Says Christy Lawrence. You know what? If you were to look at race the way it's defined politically nowadays, you have white people, you have black people, you have red people, yellow people, however the simplest form they define it as. But the problem is they're all part of the same race. We're all humans. So racism doesn't really work. I'm not racist. I have nothing against anybody of another race because we're all of the same race. So I have problems with individuals. Boom. People make me mad. People piss me off. So we go on. Let's see. This only strengthens my faith and my knowledge. It's hard to understand. Aren't you Jewish by mother? Wouldn't you be human to Adam? Eve by mother. That's what Francis says. Hard to understand. Aren't you Jewish by mother? Wouldn't you be human to Adam, Eve, and by mother? I'm not sure what you mean. If you mean the genetic line, DNA line comes down through the mother, yeah. But the ancient Jews, they weren't even Jews. The ancient Israelites, the Hebrews, they traced it all through the male line. So let's see. Yeah, I agree with you, Christy. F-U, hashtag politics. Today is my little person's Nugget's 4th birthday, says Michelle. Happy birthday. Little personal nugget. Let's see. Okay, let's go on. Everybody wish happy birthday to the youngster. And let's move on. Next section is called the nitty gritty. Because we've spent a great deal of this book talking about the spiritual and religious take on the Nephilim and their interpretation in the human bloodlines, let's look to some of the evidences that could be for the foundation for an extraterrestrial, or better, alien theory of human development, interruption. The UFO manifestations seem to be, by and large, merely minor variations of the age-old demonological phenomenon. Now, I've got these footnoted. I don't know who said that. Maybe I should look that up so I can tell you who's saying this. In chapter 6, let's see. Hang on. Chapter 6. Oh, this is John Keel. Yeah, it's 3, 4, and 5. Oh, John Keel said, the UFO manifestations seem to be, by and large, merely minor variations of the age-old demonological phenomenon. Then the next quote is Dr. Pierre Guérin, 30 years after Kenneth Arnold, Flying Saucer Review. He wrote this in 1979. He said, UFO behavior is more akin to magic than physics as we know it. The modern UFO nauts and the demons of past days are probably identical. And then the third quote here is G.H. Pember, Earth's Earliest Ages and Their Connection with Modern Spiritualism and Philosophy and Theosophy. And he wrote this in 1867. He said, the occultist is brought into intellectual communication with the spirits of the air and can receive any knowledge which they possess or any false impression they choose to impart. The demons seem permitted to do various wonders at their request. So that's the spiritual side. Now, it's very interesting. I was reading a book back when I was with TAPS Paramag. I was talking to Nick Redfern, who had written the book End Times or something like that was the title. And I didn't quote him in this book, but he talked about in this book the Collins Elite, which is part of the Pentagon. It's been around since the mid-1940s until very recently. And they came out in recent days, meaning the last 10 years, and had said something about believing with all their decades of study into ufology and alien phenomenon through the Pentagon that aliens were one and same with demons. That's what our government came up with, or at least a branch that operated within our government. The majority of alien abduction cases recorded in modern history have the same earmarks and traditional elements as are seen in the written accounts of the Watchers descending to the earth to impregnate human women. Sure, the facts differ, the tales are much less mythological in scope, but the act itself is something that bears remarkable resemblance to the acts committed by the Watchers. Are we seeing today similar events as those described in the book of Genesis and Enoch? Or has an entirely fabricated modern mythos been constructed around the writings of people like Humanists? The main problem with Sitchin's work was his lack of translating the ancient texts. The conclusion he drew had to be manipulated, squeezed, and otherwise made to fit into the theories he was promulgating. So I often hear major proponents of the ancient alien theories decry the belief systems of theologians. It's almost as if one is required to have an atheistic or agnostic dogma in place in order to put forward an extraterrestrial hypothesis. To me, this has the very same dogmatic approach as do the biblical theologians who insist that aliens could not exist because they're not mentioned expressly in the pages of Scripture. Now, the Anunnaki, I've got as my subheading here, Anunnaki, you're the one, you make legends lots of fun. I'll be 47 in July. Nathaniel still isn't speaking, so your kindnesses help with the exhaustion. Oh, well, that's something I've just stepped into and don't know anything about, and we'll maybe come back to that in a bit. All one needs to do is enter the words Anunnaki and aliens together in a Google search to find an endless list of websites that state nearly the same exact thing as each other. That the Anunnaki built a race of android beings to subjugate the people of Sumerian civilization. Sadly, none of these websites cite any sources that would have translated Sumerian cuneiform texts as stating that sort of information. When putting forward a statement regarding these kinds of ancient findings, it is all important to offer up the texts themselves, or the source of the research academic who translated the text, revealing that sort of information. Sadly, again, it is more likely that the readers and proponents of works such as Sitchin's are merely parroting the words of their New Ageist teacher without researching his claims to see if they possess any sort of veracity. Now, that is a problem I've seen. You can go from site to site to site to site and look at the descriptions of these things out on the internet, and you will find that there are so many of those sites that say the same thing as each other, absolutely verbatim, almost word for word. And yet none of them have source points. None of them list a bibliography. None of them list a footnote saying, here's where to go look up where I got my information. They just copy it from one to the other. And that simply means they're not doing any research on their own. So Semitic scholar John Hayes, in his work, The Akkadian Language, makes the observation that the term Anunnaki is interchangeable with the word Ijiji, which translates roughly as those who observe, or the Watchers. The Ijiji are referred to as the gods who reside in heaven, while the Anunnaki are mentioned as being in both heaven and on earth. When the Sumerian god Marduk asks a question of the Anunnaki, it is the Ijiji who respond. So the Anunnaki and the Ijiji are more than likely candidates for the Watchers after their descent to the earth. But are they an alien race? Well, certainly within the context of the mythology, they are alien to this in the sense that they come from some other place other than the earth. According to the Sumerian texts, they resided in both heaven and earth. Once you see that the terms are interchangeable, so the heavenly Ijiji are the same as the Chthonic or underworld gods, the Anunnaki. According to Boulet's work, the Sumerians and the Akkadians did not refer to the Anunnaki as gods. It was later cultures that introduced the notion of divine beings, and that was what gradually made its way into our language and thinking. The Sumerians referred to the Anunnaki by the term Ilu, or the lofty ones, from which the Semitic Ili and El of the Hebrew evolved. And as an interesting cross-cultural reference, Prince Utu's name in the Mayan language was Zakifili Bule. What? It seems like I'm missing something there. And as an interesting cross-cultural reference, Prince Utu's name in the Mayan language was Zakipili. Zakipili. Oh, it's got the ili at the end. Not paying attention to my own writing. Boulay, in his fervent belief that the ancient gods were indeed of alien origin, goes on to say that although the term Anunnaki is used generically to apply to all Proto-Sumerians who came to this planet, it means literally the sons of An, the greatest among their ancient gods. In the antediluvian or pre-flood world, a large group of these Anunnaki descended from their mothership to colonize Earth. According to the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian myth of creation, 300 of these Anunnaki descended to the Earth, while another 300 remained aboard their spaceship. These were called Igigi and presumably were the technical crew of the spacecraft. Yes, I just saw that, Mark. Crowley was brilliant but tragic. All right. There are no pictures or drawings left of the Anunnaki, but there are many small figurines that some ancient alienists say resemble the alien greys of modern ufology. Were the Anunnaki the beings described by the ancient Sumerians? And were they the equivalent of the gray aliens, synonymous with so many UFO and alien abduction cases reported in current history? Contemporary reports of these encounters bear a strong similarity to the ancient accounts of the Anunnaki and their appearance among the Sumerian people. I'm just going to show you a couple of plates that I threw into. These are some of the figurines that you see in ancient Sumerian culture. And these are some of the cylinder seals, meaning they were round cylinders, and they unrolled them to get these images. And of this one here, right here, it says of this, these are images on a Sumerian clay tablet, and they're believed to depict the Anunnaki and their flying vehicles, advanced spacecraft used by the Anunnaki gods to descend to the earth. The tall figure to the left may depict the half-man, half-fish god Oannes, who emerged from the ocean to teach the skills to ancient mankind. So you can take another look at that. And you can see there is their flying spacecraft of the Anunnaki. And there's Oannes, the fish guy. All right. So, as mentioned previously, the Sumerian culture is the oldest known written language culture. Even today, we still use the same system of mathematics, the same basic calendar, and the telling of time that they developed. They possessed an amazing knowledge of the solar system and of beings coming down to Earth. The Sumerians tell us that the Anunnaki had helpers who often performed such tasks as flying their craft or helping with miscellaneous deeds. The Sumerians directly explain that these helpers were not living beings, but had the physical capabilities of rendering living human tasks. AI intelligence, artificial intelligence. The Anunnaki and the Igigi also appear in other Mesopotamian cultures, sharing a commonality that isn't just limited to the descriptions found in Genesis and Enoch. They are also found in the Ugaritic texts and the Canaanite pantheon as the Banu Ili or Banu Ilimi. There are also more recent finds that place them in Amorite and Phoenician inscriptions dating to the 8th and 7th centuries BCE. The huge significance of these similar finds, according to Craig Hines, is the fact that the other cultures also recognize these beings as non-human royal ambassadors sent to humanity at the behest of the supreme God. So, next section, Psalms, Hymns, and UFOs. No other book in the Old Testament is as richly beautiful in its imagery as the compiled book of Psalms. They include songs written by King David and songs written by his chief musician, as well as poetry to be accompanied by musical instruments and used in worship and prayer. Penned by various other writers, one of the Psalms is even a prayer of forgiveness from David after he committed adultery with Bathsheba, the wife of one of his war captains, and he had the man murdered. That psalm, it's beautiful, it's poetic. This is why they referred to King David as the sweet psalmist of Israel. I know he said in that psalm, Psalm 51, I think it was. He said after he had sinned, he said, "Against thee and thee only have I sinned," he says to God. He says, "Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow." That's what David wrote. But in and throughout the beautiful poetic language of the Psalms is an undercurrent of visionary language that could possibly imply encounters with what some have suggested are alien encounters. Is it possible that David, the sweet singer of Israel, as he was once known, had a close encounter that he described or hid in a song to the praise of God? Psalm 18. You can go in your Bibles. Turn in your Bibles to Psalm 18, and we'll see what the Lord has to say. So Psalm 18 holds an intriguing story that tells of David being surrounded by enemies and being forced into deep water, from which he was suddenly taken up out of and put in a large place. He describes the scene in very vivid terms: the heavens opening up and God descending mounted on a cherub. Not your typical mental image of a cherub, a heavenly beast that rode on the clouds. Can you see that now? Get your pictures in your head of the archetypical character of God riding down on the shoulders of a winged little fat cherub. David then writes that God astride his cherub was followed by or left a jet stream of dark clouds that produced hail and a great noise coming from God. Is this all incarnate manifestation of God, a miraculous act or deliverance? Or could it be something else, something much more like the vision of Ezekiel, who saw what had been described in modern terms as some sort of craft, the wheel within a wheel within a wheel? David finishes the account of the heavenly attack, telling of bolts of lightning being shot at his enemies, scattering them. This was all followed by a great earthquake, leaving the modern-day reader wondering if this entire account is a description of alien craft and weaponry being used to deliver King David of Israel, the same man who slew one of the few remaining Nephilim, Goliath of Gath. And then, by the way, hunted down in the subsequent years, Goliath of Gath's three other brothers who were also Nephilim. And he took his head. Could this be the rescue mission sent to the man who killed one of the descendants of the great giants? Or is this merely the song written by a man who was, like Moses, establishing his tightness with God before the people he ruled? I'm going to read this psalm, Psalm 18, verses 4 through 19. Go like this. The sorrows of death overtook me, and the rush of the ungodly people made me afraid. The sorrows of hell overtook me. The traps of death captured me. In my distress I called on Yahweh and cried out to my God, who heard my voice out of the sanctuary and listened to my cry. Then the earth quaked, and the foundations of the hills were disturbed and shaken, because God was angry. There went up a smoke out of the face of God, and fire out of the mouth of God, in which the flames consumed everything ignited by them. God opened the heavens, coming down with dark smoke underneath, riding on a cherub, a heavenly being, and flying on the wind, making darkness the hiding place of God, with the shelter of dark waters and the thick clouds of the skies all around. But the brightness that surrounded God was followed by the thick clouds that passed, with hailstones and flashes of lightning. The noise of Yahweh rumbled in the heavens, and the voice of the Most High God spoke through the hailstones and flashes of light. Yes, God sent out bolts of electricity, the enemies, shooting out like flames of lightning and destroying them. Then the outlets of water were seen, and the heart of the earth was uncovered at your word, O Yahweh, from the exhaust of your face. God sent from above, taking hold of me and drawing me up out of much water, delivering me from my strong enemies and from those who hated me, which were too strong for me, and who had shamed me in the day of my misfortune. But you, O Yahweh, were my stay. You brought me forward also into a large place and delivered me, because you delighted in me. Now, of course, it could seem to be a great songwriter. It could simply be a great songwriter, storyteller, embellishing his tale with colorful, vivid imagery. It's interesting to me how so many Bible believers will entertain and believe the most garish, creative stories told in the pages of Scripture, but will shun the notion of the existence of aliens, UFOs, and ghosts because they're just too damn far-fetched. All right, next section. A long time ago in a galaxy very close to home. Another Psalm of David tells of God's presence shaking the earth and the heavens descending like an object of silver and gold, with chariots of heaven numbering 20,000, containing thousands of heavenly beings. He described it as an inanimate object found in the feeding pens of a sheepfold that comes to life and flies through the air like a dove, shimmering with silver and gold and glowing white like snow. I got to tell you, there are times you wonder what these old patriarchs were smoking. He came up out of a pig pen. He described armies running in fear from its presence. Could this be a mother spacecraft with many smaller spacecrafts containing their occupants? Would these aliens come to the rescue of God's chosen one? It says in Psalm 68, O God, when you went forward before your people Israel, when you marched with them through the wilderness, Selah, the earth shook and the sounds descended at your presence. Even Sinai itself quaked at the presence of God, the God of your people Israel. Leaders of armed forces ran away, and our dependents at home received the benefits. Though you've been as lifeless as a metal pot, yet you will fly as the silver wings of a dove, with feathers of gold yellow. When the Almighty scattered rulers in it, it was as white as snow on Mount Zalmon. The vehicles of God are 20,000, in which are thousands of angels. My sovereign God is among them, as in Mount Sinai, in the holy place. Sing to God, you nations of the earth, O sing praises to Yahweh, Selah, to the great one who rides on the heaven of heavens, which are eternal. See, the mighty voice of God sounds out. We attribute strength to you, God. Your greatness is above your people, Israel, and your strength is in the skies. O God, you are awesome, coming out of your holy places. It is you, God, who gives strength and power to your people, Israel. God be blessed. The ostentatious power of the remote. If you're a follower of the more contemporary UFO sightings and activities, you'll have noticed that many of them take place in remote areas, such as deserts and mountainous regions, and over large bodies of water, despite the more recent advent of mass sightings over populated areas. Now consider some of the biblical events that have piqued the curiosities of ancient biblical UFO theorists. Moses was witness to a physical manifestation of God while hidden in the cleft of a secluded mountaintop. The prophet Elijah and Moses appeared to Jesus and two of his disciples on the very slopes of the same mountain where the watchers were to have descended to the earth in the book of Enoch. Mount Hermon. God protected the children of Israel with a pillar of cloud by day and one of fire by night as they wandered as a nomadic tribe of freed slaves after the first Passover in the Exodus. Are these accounts of God's miraculous majesty and power, or could they possibly be descriptions of events that might be linked to UFO and alien activity? The 29th Psalm describes some unusual activity in remote, out-of-the-way places that ancient alien theorists have linked to possible UFO sightings of a biblical proportion. And Psalm 29 says in part this: "The voice of Yahweh is heard across the oceans. The God of glory rumbles, echoing over the seas. The voice of Yahweh is strong and majestic. The voice of Yahweh snaps the cedars in two. Yes, Yahweh snaps the cedars of Lebanon completely in two. Yahweh makes the volcanoes erupt. The voice of Yahweh spews fiery flames. The voice of Yahweh shakes the desert. The wilderness rumbles. The voice of Yahweh makes the doe to bear and unclothes the forests, and everyone tells of the glory of God in the sanctuary. Yahweh rules over tsunami. Yes, O Yahweh sits as the sovereign one forever." Chris asks, is it instinctual for a person to worship a technologically superior being and give it a title of God or ruler? Well, we don't really know the answer to that because we don't know if we actually have encountered beings. What we know is this, is that humankind could possibly have seen alien or had alien interactions and dubbed these beings gods, angels, demons, devils, everything in between. We know that humans have that capacity to do that. What we can't prove is what it was they actually saw. So we can't really answer that question. Did they encounter aliens and name them gods? We don't know for sure. Maybe they encountered gods and modern people call them aliens. We don't know which is which for sure. For sure. So I don't know how to answer that question. Maybe other people can pitch in on that. Brian says, Scotty, do you think this God wanted to hide knowledge from us? Wouldn't the knowledge provided to people help take care of his creation, Earth? Maybe this God didn't want to preserve the Earth. That's a good question because I've asked it in Genesis 3 when Elohim says the humans have eaten of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil and have become like gods. Let us therefore go down and prevent them from eating of the tree of life too, lest they become just like us. And so here is the big question. What did God have against humans having knowledge? Knowledge of good and evil. If he indeed created them, did he just want them to be a little sap race that does his bidding for him? Toys. I've sometimes heard descriptions of God as being like a child who is experimenting. And the human race was an experimentation. But then he claims of himself that he is all holy and must keep his word. So you can't just wipe them all out, but he almost did with the flood. But then you remember, God made a promise to Abraham that his seed would be as the multitudes of stars in heaven, and being the Jews, and spread throughout the world. But yet there was a time where God was so pissed off with the Jews that he told Moses, he said, I am going to wipe out this people in entirety, and I'm going to restart the covenant, the promise in you, Moses, and your seed. And Moses said, no, don't do this, Lord. Now, we don't know if this is Moses building himself up in front of the people, if it's an apologetic text or what it is. But Moses is like, no, don't do that. Don't do that. I can't do that, Lord. You have to keep your word because you have claimed that you are all holiness, and therefore you must keep your word. And it says, and God repented of the evil he was going to do to Israel. So Moses changed the mind of God, and God repented of his evil. Very interesting things right there. Let me move on, and we'll maybe hit this. To eat or not to eat, that is the question. To eat the fruit or to eat the slaves? Slaves, so some claim. So now we have the Talmud. Yes. Now, let's move on. Columbus and the Psalmist. The voice of God is described as enormously powerful in this psalm. The flames and the rumbling noise, along with the weapons that snap massive cedar trees in two, cause volcanoes to erupt, make the deserts cascade with voluminous rumblings, and the forests to burn with ash. Can these all be interpreted as the manifestation of advanced alien spacecraft? Could a spaceship hide in the depths of the ocean, as many ufologists already believe? Psalm 104 describes a very bright object resting beneath the water, then emerging and moving with great speed into the clouds. Interestingly, a UFO was spotted by none other than Christopher Columbus during his maiden voyage to America in 1492. Columbus recorded in his log that as he was sailing through the waters of what is now the Bermuda Triangle, his compass began acting in an odd fashion. He and Pedro Gutierrez, while on the deck of the Santa Maria, observed a light, quote, a light glimmering at a great distance, end quote. As they observed it for several hours, quote, in sudden and passing gleams, end quote. 4 hours later, they saw land. Columbus attributed the sighting to divine guidance to the New World. What do you think of that? Then in Psalm 102, it says, covering yourself with light as with clothes, you who stretches out the heavens like a curtain, who lays the shafts of your chambers in the waters, and makes the clouds your vehicle, moving on the wings of the wind, who makes the angel spirits your ministers of flaming fire. So interesting. Now, making a way through the sea. Unusual activity from the depths of the sea is also mentioned in Psalms 74 and 77. According to the book of Exodus, God let a strong east wind blow all night, parting the waters of the Red Sea, or as many biblical scholars believe, the marshy region of the Yam Suf to the far northern delta region of the Red Sea. What other than an almighty God could send a powerful force strong enough to part the waters and let the Israelites cross on dry ground, releasing it just in time to drown the whole of Pharaoh Amenhotep II's mighty army? Psalm 77:19 tells us that God travels in the sea and the oceans, and that his path cannot be discovered. Is this a reference to underwater craft that traverse in obscurity through briny depths? In Psalm 77, it says, you divided the sea by your strength. You broke the heads of the dragons in the oceans. You broke the heads of the Leviathan, the great sea beasts, in pieces, and gave them for meat to the people living in the wilderness. You opened up the wellspring of the flood. You dried up mighty rivers. The waters felt you, O God. The waters felt you, disturbed them, and the depths were troubled as well. The clouds poured rain, the skies thundered, and your lightning flashed also. The voice of your thunder was in the heavens. The lightning lit up the world, and the earth trembled and shook. Your way is in the sea, and your path in the great oceans, and your footsteps are not known. All right, moving on. Now, by the way, I don't know if I write about this. Talked about the Red Sea, and in this book I put a picture that has become rather famous. Dr. Lennart Molar and Karolinska from the Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden, took a picture of what he believed to be chariot wheels in the depths of the Red Sea. And it's still shiny. It's not coral covered because they say, well, chariot wheels don't corrode. And this is the picture. It's in black and white here. It's a little hard to make out. But here's the picture. You see chariot wheel, then an illustration, ancient Egyptian illustration of what that would have looked like. Now, I don't see it right here in the text. I was going to mention it, but I turned the page and the picture was there. And I said, one of the many gilded chariot wheels discovered at the bottom of the Red Sea in the Gulf of Aqaba. New coral does not grow on gold, but the wood inside had completely deteriorated. Inset the chariot wheel in Egyptian tomb painting. I don't know whatever came of that, but I had heard later that that has been thoroughly debunked. And I also look at that and say, I don't believe that that's where the Red Sea crossing would have been anyway. The Gulf of Aqaba, off the Nuiva beach, it's halfway down the Red Sea. I believe they crossed way to the north in the Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds, shallow lake, and that there was a natural phenomenon that could have taken place. But that's a totally different thing. Now here I've got wax on, wax off. In Psalm 97, a description of God or of an alien craft, melting hills, enfolding darkness broken by fire, lightning and illumination. The Psalm 97 says, clouds and darkness are around you. Righteousness and judgment are the symbols of your reign. A fire goes before you and burns up your enemies everywhere. Your lightning enlightened the world. The people of the earth saw and trembled. The hills melted like wax at the presence of the Sovereign One, at the presence of the most sovereign of the whole earth. The heavens declare your righteousness and everybody sees your glory. As you can see, I'm going through some of these mentions in the Psalms of things that come across as perhaps something other than what we think they are. Next section is Riders on the Storm. Do God and his angels ride in spacecrafts? Pardon me, but what does God need with a starship? Quoting James T. Kirk from Star Trek V. Do God and his angels ride in spacecrafts? In one psalm, they are described as a cherub on the back of whom God rides down out of the clouds. Here in Psalm 144, we have a description of God and his angels flying down out of the heavens in what is said by biblical alienists to be a spacecraft. What if the alien spacecraft contained what we know as God and the angels screaming down out of the heavens and laying waste to the mountains? Is this the description of a terrible ufological weapon or the power of a divine God? The psalmist may have wondered the very same thing as he questions why God would take special note of his people and destroy their enemies. In this verse, he prays for God to open the heavens and come back down to destroy his enemies. Psalm 144 says, Yahweh, what are human beings that you take note of them? Or the children of humanity that you take account of them? People are as nothing. Their days are as shallow as are as a shadow that passes away. Open your heavens, O Yahweh, and come down. You touch the mountains and they smoke. Make lightning and scatter them. Shoot out your lightning bolts and destroy them. You know, you wonder sometimes when you read some of this stuff. This is either ancient descriptions of technology, or this could just be the power of a divine, of a deity, of a divinity. What do you think? Frogs and locusts and the angel of death. Oh my. Psalm 78 is a maskil of Asaph. A maskil being a particular style of song, much like we'd say ballad or love song, in which the psalmist recounts the mighty power of God displayed against the Egyptians when Moses led the Hebrews out of bondage. He speaks of the terrible wonders of God when he parted the waters of the Red Sea, turned the Egyptian sources of water to blood, spread blight, frogs, and locusts across the land, then engulfed the Egyptians in utter darkness so that Pharaoh could not see his hand before his face. The devastation goes all the way to the house of Pharaoh when the final plague of the firstborn takes the eldest child in every house of Egypt. Some have speculated that it was the power of alien forces that brought down the heinous plagues and executed the great geological miracles. Now, this is a long passage. I'm reading from Psalm 78. It says, this is a psalm about the Exodus. You divided the sea and allowed them to pass through it, making the waters to stand up as a mountain pass. You also led them with a cloud in the daytime and through the night with the light of fire. You split the rock in the wilderness, gave them water to drink from a deep creek. God brought streams of water out of the rock also, causing it to run down like rivers. And they sinned all the more against God by provoking the Most High in the wilderness. And they tempted God in their hearts by asking for meat in their appetites. Yes, they spoke against God and said, can God furnish a table in the wilderness? Look, God split the rock so that the waters gushed out and the streams overflowed. Can God give us bread also? Can God provide meat for the people as well? Yahweh heard this and was angry. So a fiery wrath was kindled against Jacob, Jacob being another name for Israel. And anger also came up against Israel, because they did not believe in God and didn't trust in your salvation, though you had commanded the clouds from above and opened the doors of heaven. And it had rained down manna on them to eat, and had given them of the grain of heaven. People ate the food of angels for you. God sent them enough meat to fill them. You caused an east wind to blow in the heaven, and powerfully brought in the south wind, raining meat on them as dust, and quail like the sand of the sea, and let them fall in the middle of their camp all around their tents. So they ate and were filled, because you gave them what they desired. They weren't kept from their appetites, but while their meat was yet in their mouths, the anger of God came down on them, and slew the fattest of them, and brought down the chosen people of Israel. Here, I know you're complaining about not having any meat and eating this frosty little bread shit that I rain down on you every day. So I'll send you a bunch of quails to satisfy and shut you up. And now that you're full, I'm going to kill you. They neither remembered God's hand nor the day when you delivered them from the adversary, how God had wrought signs in Egypt and wonders in the fields of Zoan, turning their rivers into blood, making it so that they couldn't drink it. You sent different sorts of flies among them, which devoured them, and frogs, which destroyed them, giving their increase to the caterpillar, and their labor to the locust also, destroying their vines with hail, and their sycamore trees with frost, destroying their cattle also in the hail, and their flocks with hot lightning bolts, casting on them the fierceness of your anger, rage, indignation, and trouble, by sending evil angels among them, making way for anger, not sparing their soul from death, but giving their lives over to the pestilence, and striking all the firstborn in Egypt, their strongest rule, in the sanctuaries of Ham. But Ham being a name, not a food item. But you made your own people go forward like animals, guiding them in the wilderness like a herd, leading them safely on, so that they weren't afraid, while the sea overwhelmed their enemies. You brought them to the border of your sanctuary, even to this mountain, which the hand of God had brought. Bought, not brought. Now, into the belly of the earth. There was a great rebellion amongst the Hebrews, led by a man named Dathan. Moses descended with the tablets of the law. After spending 40 days atop the fiery, tumultuous, God-inhabited Mount Sinai, only to find the people worshiping a golden calf they had erected as their God, who led them out of bondage. In righteous anger, Moses breaks the tablet of the law, calls out the people to divide the followers of Dathan on this side and the followers of Jehovah on that side. After they separate, the ground immediately opens up in a great earthquake and swallows up Dathan and his rebels. Played by Edward G. Robinson in the Cecil B. DeMille Classic of 1957. You can imagine the hushed silence that fell over the rest of the people. With all the miraculous wonders performed under the leadership of Moses during their great exodus, one wonders how these people would do anything but follow Moses' lead. Yet ancient alienists believe there is more to this account than a simple miraculous tale of divine judgment. Was Moses not only being led by UFOs through the wilderness, but also being protected and upheld by a race of alien visitors? Here's how the book of Psalms records this event from the Exodus. This is from Psalm 106. They envied Moses and Aaron, the saints of Yahweh, also in the camp. The earth opened up and swallowed Dathan, and buried the followers of Abraham, of Abiram. And a fire was kindled in the middle of them, burning up those sinful ones. They joined themselves also to the false god, Baal Peor, and ate offerings made for the dead. So they provoked you to anger with their inventions, and a deadly illness came on them. Then Phinehas stood up and executed judgment, so the deadly illness was stopped. Now, that's just a few of the Psalms that mention some of these things. Were we to mention every biblical passage that contains even a hint of the possibility of extraterrestrial activity, there would not be enough room in a 10-volume set to list them, let alone comment on them. This sampling should have given you a taste of what is inside the Bible itself when it comes to the imaginings and speculations of biblical alien theorists. When we consider all of the passages in Scripture that seem to indicate miraculous deeds and divine actions, and if you place all those passages in the context of, quote, ancient aliens, unquote, as opposed to the acts of Jehovah, you can see the wealth of information that is right at your fingertips on the shelves of nearly every home in Christendom. Clearly, if your perspective is one that is firmly rooted in Judeo-Christianity, you will see these passages as the amazing, almighty acts of a supreme being, benevolently and sometimes violently imposing his majesty in the lives of his prophets and worshipers, making a display of his power and his majesty. But if your beginning point is one that lies outside the realm of faith, in the divine characters dwelling in these books, then you are outside the box looking in. Under that light, these pages can be filled with accounts of ancient UFOs and alien races that appeared as God, angels, demons, and a host of other heavenly beings. If Moses, Ezekiel, David, the psalmists, and other biblical leaders and figures had in fact witnessed alien presences and interpreted their experiences as encounters with God, then it would be absolutely appropriate of them to have warned others to fear God and obey his commands. In light of the passages we have examined regarding the Watchers and their offspring, as well as the ancient gods of the Sumerians, it's clear that the issue is wide open for debate and further examination. We may never know in this lifetime if these beings are of God or from some distant corner of our physical galaxy, but there is much fodder for thought and a good starting point for examining the issue further. And thus endeth the reading of chapter 6. In the next chapter, which will be, if not tomorrow, Sunday, we'll hit it on Monday, a little bit of history. Chapter 7 is Constantine, one emperor, one God. And we'll talk about Constantine. And there he is, in statue form at the beginning of chapter 7. So, there we go. There we have the reading from the book tonight. Now, what do you think of this whole possibility of aliens versus terrestrial or spiritual beings, extraterrestrials? Excuse me, the yawn was for me, not for you. Let me take a drink. So, what do you think, folks? This, as you can see, building a case about the Nephilim and the Watchers. All through this, we've now finished chapter 6, and we're starting to get to some meat of some of these things. And so there's still yet a chapter on the Nephilim themselves. I believe that's chapter 8 coming up. So we're building this slow progression to try to say, are we examining this? Is there something more to it? Was their race interrupted, or was there something less to it? So Chris Jones says she's enjoying it. Thank you, Chris. Methinks if they need vehicles, they have physical bodies of some sort. Ain't that the truth? What does God need with a starship? Kitten says thanks. Thanks, Kitten. So I'm going to go back through just a little bit. We left off, we asked, Chris Jones had asked, is it instinctual for a person to worship a technologically superior being and give it a title of God or ruler? Yeah, I think that's instinctual, as we said, but there's no way to know exactly what they encountered. Live long and prosper, says Chris Jones. Nanu. Do I think this God wanted to hide knowledge from us? We did talk about that. Question of Brian's. God doesn't need a ship. And the big question is, are these ships that we're seeing here? I don't know. The scripture seems to say something about God and his host coming in vehicles. So, to eat or not to eat, that's the question. Slaves, so some claim. Did God specify that their land would be Israel? Yes, he did. As a matter of fact, Israel was where they came from prior to the Exodus. They emigrated down into the Delta region in Egypt, and it was there that the whole Joseph story takes place. And after that, they, of course, lived there, were enslaved there, and then exited bondage from there. And then God took them back to their homeland, which was Canaan. So yes, that was the land. Now that's the claim of Israel. It's the claim of the authors. It's the claim of the religious leaders that God intended this. So the big question is, did that really happen that way, or was it just a religious claim over land and property? Don't know for sure. Let's see. Hope Scotty is feeling better today. I am. Thank you, Michelle. Janine Griffith. Jeannie. Sorry, I keep seeing that wrong. I'm not sure of anything anymore when it comes to truth in the Old and New Testaments, such as a psyop. I agree with you there. It's sometimes really hard to figure out what is truth anymore. Or did we ever have the truth? We tend to ask ourselves, we sit back and we go, I don't know what in the Bible is true anymore. I would almost say, I don't know whether the Bible is true. And that's a flippant answer, because I do know that the history in the Bible that's been studied is efficacious. It's there. It's real history. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the faith stories wrapped around those historical events are true. So, angry divinity is interesting. Yeah. It said God got pissed off. If that's what your response was to, Chris, talking about when God got pissed off at the Israelites, was going to wipe them all out. Apologists will tell you, well, this is obviously just a picture of God not really going to do that, but he's throwing out the test to Moses, and he's doing this and blah, 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 blah. I tend to not buy that when I hear it, only because you see so many things like this in Scripture, but rare instances of God becoming angry. And it doesn't say afterwards that God said, patted Moses on the back as a man pats his fellow athlete on the butt and said, congrats, Moses, you passed the test. It doesn't say that. So it's interesting. You refer to mushrooms. Some science says they were most like them. Maybe. I know the biblical description of manna, wasn't it? It came down as the hoarfrost in the morning. And when the sun rose, it would dissolve. And so the people had to gather it up and put it in containers so they had food for the day. But if they tried to save any overnight, it would rot, except on the day before the Sabbath. On the day before the Sabbath, Friday, they could gather up as much as they wanted for the next day, and it would survive only on Friday nights. So who knows? What was manna? We don't know. Lots of explanations. Same with the Red Sea. And, we talked about the Red Sea tonight and the parting of it. The Red Sea, if you remember, the Sinai Peninsula, the Red Sea over here, and then Egypt, that the Red Sea, some people said this is where they crossed, the middle of the Red Sea. Too deep, too far apart, shore to shore. I believe that the Israelites came down from over near the Memphis area, which is east of what Cairo would be now, the land of Goshen. They followed the Wadi Tumalat, which was the wadi. There's a crescent. You can even see it in satellite pictures. Goes to the top of the Yam Suf, the bitter lakes, they called them, the Sea of Reeds, shallow lakes at the northern tip of the Red Sea. And I believe this is where they crossed. And there are other geological events that took place that I think match the scripture. As it said in the reading tonight, when I was reading some of those, it talked about how the strong east wind blew and parted the waters. You remember it says Moses took the staff, stretched it over the waters, and it said a strong east wind blew all night and parted the waters, and the hand of God held the waters, and so on. There's a geologic event that takes place. It's been recorded where a strong east wind blows down out of the Negev, the south of Israel, and into the Sinai. And that this strong east wind can sometimes, on those lakes to the north of the Red Sea, it blows so strong and so quickly in an overnight period of time, it can dry off the higher elevations of land beneath the water. And sometimes we'll leave these shallow lakes as if somebody parted the water open. You can cross on the dry ground. But as soon as that wind stops, those waters can rush back in rather quickly and immensely, like a tsunami, and have quite a force. So that's some interesting stuff when you see these biblical accounts. Let's see. That's amore, says Jeannie. When the moon hits your eye like a big pizza pie, that's amore. Let's see. I see angels as logical. Did that say, or aliens? It just jumped on me here. Oh, I see aliens as logical, says Chris. Possibly. Depends on who they are. What if they're a bunch of jerks? Or I don't know. What if you've got people commanding whole battalions of aliens that, failed at the academy but made it to captain anyway? Who knows? I watch too much Star Trek. I'm glad you thought it was fun. Great chapter, says Audrey. Thank you, Audrey. Anything's possible. Could be one and the same. Me thinks if they need vehicles, they have physical bodies, said Mark. And oh my God, people were pissed about my conversation with Wayne. Can't wait for the next one. Not sure which one that you're talking about, Brian. Let's see, Michelle, Mark. As for spiritual, they're probably just far advanced technologically. They can make it appear to us as more than they are. It's a tough road to figure out all of this. It sure is, especially when there's no real data. We have stuff written about it. We don't have photos. We don't know. We weren't there. We didn't see it. So it's really tough to create a solid case without there really being any holes in it. So let's see. Everything's a false flag, so to speak. Yes. Manna angel food cake. Very short shelf life. Very true. Let's see. We're coming to the end. Jim Mars once said manna literally meant, what is it? They didn't know either. That's exactly what the word meant. It meant, what is it? So, let's see. I think the ancestors used the best descriptive words they had to explain what they saw. I don't know what they saw, but I don't think it was anything terrestrial. And I think you're right, Audrey. I think you're right. So, without technology, it'd be hard to explain an airplane. Yeah, imagine trying to describe a cell phone without technology. Exactly. So, what's mounted behind me? Let's see. These were all mounted in my old office along with a bunch of my Egyptian artifacts and stuff. These are my swords. I used to collect them. This sword is a Scottish back sword. The basket to this dates to the 1740s. So think if you watch the series Outlander and the Battle of Culloden Moor and all of that, this dates to that period. And it's got old inscriptions on it as well, with the crown and cipher of George the King and so on. Although the blade is replica, basket's real. This was a sword. This was my stage combat sword. It's a German rapier, an exact replica of. This is just a fighting rapier, historic amalgam. And then this one is actually a sword that is Aragorn's sword from Lord of the Rings. Total fancy on that one, and it's just a fun toy. Is what that is. And then I've got my Bigfoot over here, and I got nothing else in here yet. We're just starting to set this office up, so trying to get it back up to snuff, and my American flag, of course. So and my pig with wings and pigs fly. So there you go. That's the junk behind me. So, folks, that's it for tonight. We've been going for how long? We've been going. We started at 10. It's 11:37, so about an hour and 40 minutes on this chapter. And tomorrow, either tomorrow or Monday, we'll see how I do tomorrow with Sunday night. If Sunday night's good for you guys, let me know, and we can go Sunday night too. So there it is. We've now read 6 chapters, and there's 10 chapters in all in this book. So we've got, with the conclusion, maybe 4 or 5 days left, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And then maybe the conclusion. If it's long enough, we'll save it or just tack it on to the last one. So possibly 4 more readings for this book. And I've got a couple of other books I've written, so fret not. We might get into some other books later. And I've got my own commentary to do on things. So try to get this YouTube live stream up and rolling with content for you that you will enjoy. And if you enjoyed it, please go down here and like this broadcast and also subscribe if you're not subscribed. And I would appreciate that very much. So thank you for being here. Everybody who's here, if I missed you by any chance and you slipped in and made one comment and I missed you through the whole thing, thanks for being here. And everyone, we'll see you next time. And I hope you enjoyed this. And we'll work to make it as enjoyable as possible. And hope you're digging it. See you later. Good night.